Thanks, everyone. If everyone can just take their seats so we can get started. We have we have a packed program, so we're going to kick it off a little bit earlier. I'm Bambi Francisco. Welcome to SplashX Invent Health, our series, Vator and HPs. And tonight we're talking about precision health. I asked a lot of the speakers you'll see tonight to define precision health, and because it's pretty broad, but I caught a glimpse of the hearings this morning, the historic hearings, and it just made me think it was a lot about gathering evidence. And it made me think that that's exactly what precision health is. It is about servicing up all of this new data and trying to find evidence about whether you're at risk of getting something down the road, or evidence about whether the treatment is working. So it actually applies to today and what we're going to be talking about.
Yes, and precision health in general is kind of collecting evidence from genes, from historical medical history, physical and mental and behavioral, and also your environment, because some of these genes do get unmasked based on what environment you are living in and what you're ingesting, or what you're exercising or not thereof. So we are going to talk a lot about, we have a pretty heavy set panel 1 and panel 2 of a lot of experts, and we'll be talking about where all they are focused on. Are they focused on diagnostic, predictive, and futuristic treatment that is much more unique and precise for the patient and user?
And we're going to bring in our other co-host, Fran.
Yeah, I'm not mic'd up. Thank you so
now
much.
You are.
Yeah, epigenomics is certainly a very important subject and something that certainly is a component of what we hope you talk to tonight. I'm Fran Ayala-Somayajla. I'm actually the Global Head of Population Health here at HP. It's my honor to welcome all of you. I always like to start off everyone in some of the faces I've seen at other sessions, so you've heard this before. HP has over 50 years in healthcare. In fact, we started our I guess, time in this space beginning with ultrasound, cardiac ultrasound. We moved into things like actually genomics. The first human genome was actually sequenced on HP compute power. And even over the years we have changed, our investment and commitment to healthcare has not changed. And so we're really honored to have you here today, and we look forward to learning much as we exchange with one another. And this time I'm going to pass it over to Archana, who's going to do a little quick intro.
Yes, so welcome. I work as Global Medical Director here at HP. A few housekeeping things. We do have the restrooms in that direction. We do have the mic that's right in the middle, and we want to keep it interactive. So if you do have a question that you would want to pose to the panel, please feel free to come up front, and we would have you have your say and speak up. We will have, with that, I would like to actually introduce Daniel Kraft, who leads the Singularity University, has just done a TED Talk on precision health. So we are thrilled to have you here. And with that, take it away.
Great, thanks.
Your mic there.
Thank you.
Yes.
Great, thanks for having me. I used to live in the faculty ghetto right across the way, so it's my second time ever at HP, but I have an HP printer and I love it. It refills itself, so very smart. And so, as mentioned, I have a fun sort of role chairing the medicine side of Singularity University and run a program called Exponential Medicine. We try to look at all the convergent technologies and how they might impact the future. It's coming up in a month. We had some faculty like Jeffrey Brewer who've been in the past, and hopefully some of you can join. If you have startups, we have an amazing innovation lab there too. So enough advertisement. But I thought instead of trying to do an overview of precision health and medicine, I'd sort of give you a take of how we can probably take some of this data and apply it in new ways that, in fact, from precision health to precision medicines. And so starting with the problem, we really live now in a medication nation. We have 4.5 billion prescriptions prescribed every year. That's 15 per man, woman, and child. That's a lot. And most of us have challenges handling those medications, not following the directions, taking them incorrectly. It's often one-size-fits-all dosing. So that leads to a lot of challenges. We spend a lot of money, have poor adherence. And I think in our new connected, digital, personalized medicine age, we can do a better job. So let's start by looking a little bit more at the problem. We think we practice precision, personalized medicine, but we're still in an era of in precision medicine. For the top 10 grossing drugs on the market today, they only are effective for about 1 in 4 to 1 in 23 of the folks who take them. So that's great if you're number one, but what about everybody else? And that's only part of the challenge. We know that even when the medications don't work, they can sometimes cause harm. I think you're all familiar with aspirin, which is often commonly given for anticoagulation or cardiovascular risk. It turns out, about 1 in 3, 1 in 4 are actually aspirin resistant, so don't even benefit cardiovascularly, but still have the risk of gastrointestinal bleeds that kill about 5,000 Americans every year. And even in the news, recent study that aspirin may really have no survival benefit at all. So drug interactions or adverse side effects are actually, by some estimates, the number 4 leading cause of death in the United States. And we have those challenges often because of dosing. And I think we've all had our own adverse drug reactions. My own grandfather passed away after he had a single dose of antibiotic, turned his kidneys off. And that's just one example of a bad one. Part of those challenges are related to, we don't really do personalization. I trained in pediatrics, little kids, and internal medicine, big kids. So, we might, I might have been in the NICU one night, dosing to a fraction of a milligram dose for a NICU baby, and the next night in the adult, emergency room where, the 200-pound lineman or the frail nursing home patient would get the same exact dose, which would often lead to overdosing the frail nursing home patient, underdosing the football player. And so it's a challenge to do this personalization, and weight is just one example. On top of the adverse drug reactions and dosing challenges, we have issues with adherence or compliance. The average 65-year-old, or 45% of Americans over 65 are on 5 or more pills a day. Some are on 15 or more, so that leads to a lot of issues with polypharmacy, not taking pills appropriately, which leads to downstream costs. If we even improved our adherence with statins by a small percentage point, that would reduce by a large number hospitalizations, strokes, and heart attacks. So adherence, polypharmacy, all grand challenges. So what if we had a better way to use data in our new era to move beyond the cutting edge of precision medicine, pill cutting? That's literally what you do when you want to dose adjust. Get past the cutting edge of transmitting medical information, still primarily by fax machine, even at Stanford and PAMF and UCSF, and move beyond that. So I think part of the possibility here is our new era of precision and personalized health. We have an explosion of wearables that can collect our health and our behavior, and that's often for many of us quantified self. We're data geeks. We hold our data, it's on our smartphones. It's starting to shift to quantified health, where you can transmit that. Right now, I can send my data from my phone to my doc at Stanford. You may not know what to do with it yet or want that information, but we're moving to the era where our providers will have our digital exhaust and our omics, and hopefully can use that proactively for prevention, diagnostics, and therapy. So let's see how that could play a role for something common. Hypertension is the leading cause of early death and morbidity across the planet. About half of American adults have hypertension. Less than half have it well controlled. It often requires 2 or 3 classes of medications, which aren't often easy to take. The feedback loops are kind of broken. We have some new digital tools to collect your blood pressure now, and you can potentially transmit to your clinician. They're coming to your watch. They're coming in non-invasive forms. This is a local startup called Lumio, a sort of a radar-based form. So we might have the potential to really have real-time, accurate hypertension or blood pressure numbers, which would enable more precision dosing and therapy. We also have the ability now to, of course, do some interesting things. Apple was not the first to do it. I can do the EKG in my watch now without them with the AliveCore device. They're doing 1 million or more EKGs a month now. It's a bit of a data play. But new ways to pick up or track something like AFib, or a patch from down the street with Vital Connect. I have it in my pocket somewhere that can live stream my vitals, whether it's my stress levels and my EKG, my steps, my posture, intensive care unit level information that can be applied and used even retrospectively. So bottom line, as you all know, there's lots of new ways of collecting data. How do we make it useful? We can go beyond just tracking our weight to tracking our shape. This is another local startup, so I can not just get my pounds, but how much body fat, how much muscle, lean mass, if any swelling in my legs if I'm a heart failure patient, and potentially use that clinically. And then, of course, you don't need to be a data geek or a wearable technician. You can just even use potentially Wi-Fi, as MIT has shown, to pick up the vital signs of multiple people in the same room. So soon we'll be able to collect our digital exhaust seamlessly in our Internet of Things connected home. And that provides a lot of challenges and opportunity. And then beyond, of course, vitals, we have labs on a chip, despite the disaster of Theranos down the road. That's coming in many realms. It's coming to our smartphone as a platform, so you'll be able to get measure your everything from your cholesterol to how thin your blood is, at the point of care or in wherever you might be. And beyond the lab on a chip, we are all in the era of the exponentially cheaper full genome, about $1,000 or less today. I've had mine done. That means we can all have our pharmacogenomics. Even with 23andMe, you can have your pharmacogenomics, which will predict what I need, a normal, low, high, or different statin than everybody else here. That information isn't even utilized today. So lots of potentially personal data. How do we turn that into something useful? How do we potentially integrate that for a clinician who's trying to pick the right statin or blood pressure regimen to make sense of that? So I think part of this era of precision medicine is to bring it into the workflow of the clinician, to pull that information together using things like Google Baseline and all of us trial to understand what that means. So even if you do have your right mix of dose and combination of pills, we're still using our cutting edge technology like this for most of us, right? Some of us have some more fancy ways to track our meds. There's apps, there's connected pill bottles that will tweet you or your mother if you don't take your meds. You all heard about PillPack being acquired for $1 billion. So there's some new solutions there, but you still have to take often many times 5 or more pills, and they're not dose adjusted. So this got me thinking about how can we improve upon this? And by the way, don't tweet this out yet. This whole section is still a little stealthy, so please don't tweet this next section. This idea of a polypill isn't new. We have polypills with our common cold and flu elements. If you take a polypill that's a combination of aspirin, statin, beta blocker, et cetera, it's lowered heart attack and cardiovascular risks, but it's not really personalized to the individual. So the concept I've been developing is this idea of a personalized polypill that could be potentially 3D printed and personalized and based on you. So you all know 3D printing is exploding from prosthetics to braces to hearing aids. The concept I've been pursuing with a new startup is the idea of personalized telemeds. So what if you could take your common aspirin, statin, beta blocker, synthroids, print them in a single pill that you could take easily with doses that matched you? So I had this idea, worked with, put a little team together, an engineer, and this is the basic concept. Instead of cartridges of ink, you'd have cartridges of little micromeds that you would sort based on the number you might need. You need more cumin and a couple more yellows. You need less diuretic, lower the blues. And you could do the pharmacogenetics by changing the dosing so that the capture on the pill itself. And the sort of the printer, like in your corner pharmacy, might look like this, where you would, again, start with common generics and combine a medication for an individual patient, essentially automated compounding. And once you'd sort of made that pill, you could have some fun bells and whistles, do things like print, here's the cap, put on the name, the QR code. So you'd have your pill, you'd have a QR code, you could do dose adjustments, taperings, all those sorts of fancy elements there. And so this is the idea. Basically took this to practice, built an initial prototype. Software lets you dial in 16 different sugar medications at the moment. That's the actual printer. I didn't bring it with us. Recently gave a TED talk on this, so unveiled it there. And basically, it sort of works like this. You have different silos that adjust the height. You can drop the micromeds down the pathway, and this is sort of the print on the right, which hopefully shows up here. Is it going to play? Oops, come on. Oh well, 1 second. I'm almost done. Oh well, you can't see it. But bottom line is, the future of this, I hope, will lead us to an era where we can literally, 3D print a pill. It'll get delivered by Amazon in your sort of cartridge like this. Those might be your 6 meds. We might start in a corner pharmacy, but move to your bathroom counter, where you put your cartridge in, just like you do with your HP printer, and literally print your meds every day. And I think that might be a path to the future of smart, connected, precision health meets precision medicines, that's where I'm hoping to take that. So if anyone wants to help, just starting this journey, Daniel in telemedicine, Christine is here, is also on the team in the back, and that's it. So hope you have a good rest of the conference and go create the future of personalized medicine. Thanks.
Okay. That was great. Thank you, Daniel. So now this is a great time to bring up the panelists, and we're going to ask them what they think of your new idea. That might be the first question. So if the panelists, you know who you are, the investors, VCs, could you please come on up?
Yes. Our first panel, please welcome. And this was a great way to start with a glimpse of what the future looks like in precision health and medicine. With that, we'll welcome our investor panel so they can talk about what they have been investing in.
Yeah, so how we like to host these salons is we like to open it up with, well, this is the first time we've had Daniel, and that was an excellent presentation and opener, but we'd like to bring in the investors to talk about what they're investing in, and then we'll have, you see in your agenda, we'll have several startups emerging. They'll give several presentations, sort of a breath of fresh air, and then we'll have tech pioneers and healthcare incumbents in the final panel to sort of give us a reality check where sort of innovation meets commercialization. So that's how we've formatted this. So yeah, let's kick this one off.
Let's kick this one on. So most all of our panels, we start with folks introducing themselves, because you can do a better job than us, first of all, and then you can also talk about how you arrived here and what your journey to this investor space is, and what kind of portfolio companies that you're investing in. What are you seeing being pitched to you? What is up on the horizon? And how do you see yourself changing the landscape in precision health? So
try to say that in 2 minutes.
In 2 minutes, please go. So we're beginning from, okay, Garrett, how about you start?
I'll kick that off. I made my way here through meeting you at another conference, and happily accepted this invitation to talk. Thanks, Bambi. I'm with OSF Ventures. My name is Garrett Vygantas. OSF Healthcare System is a 14-hospital healthcare system based in the Midwest. I am based here representing the system. We have a $75 million evergreen vehicle. Just launched it in 2016. We typically invest in companies in the A round and afterwards, and they somehow have to touch the patient-provider ecosystem. So we're not really looking at anything that is more fintech, insurance tech related. We're more focused on making lives easier for our providers and for our patients. About 13 companies in our portfolio. Our typical bite size is $500,000 to $3 million on entry. We'll support that up to 3-4 times that over the life of the investment. I think that's it for me.
Hi, I'm Raimundo from Kaiser Permanente Ventures. I got here in part because my colleague Liz Rocket was here prior to me. Also behavioral health panel, so got connected to Bambi.
We always have Kaiser representing.
From an investment perspective, we are looking for things that will affect our members. And so looking for investments we can make that, either near-term, long-term, can be something that improves the life, the experience, and even potentially the financial aspect of our members' lives. And obviously also plays a role in the broader healthcare system, because we recognize that even though we're a large system, an N of one customer does not make a good financial investment. We invest in everything in healthcare except for biotech. And that's actually probably relevant for this panel in particular, is that what we try to do is leverage the expertise of the 200,000 employees, which includes 22,000 physicians, and then experts within the health plan and IT system, and really use that as a signal and expertise leverage. And if it's a science question, unfortunately, that actually we don't get a lot of leverage out of our system. But if it's a clinical translation of the science, we do. And so I think, Daniel, your presentation was very well put, because I think a lot of the precision medicine challenge is actually how do you translate that into care at the level of the provider. And so in terms of investment, we've made one investment specific around sort of the precision medicine rubric. It was actually a services company, it's a tech-enabled services company called Genome Medical, because one of the roadblocks is the actual ability to understand what test to order and then how the interpretation of that test affect clinical care. And so, from our perspective, that's really what we're focused on. And then from a fund perspective, we tend to put about $10 million to life of investment, and we typically start Series B and beyond. So we don't do seed stage, much to this point that a couple people already talked to. But usually about Series B and beyond.
Hi, I'm Risa Stack from GE Ventures. In GE Ventures, I run a group called New Business Creation, where we start companies from scratch. Oh, I better say how I better say how I know Bambi or the Vator events first. I generally do one a year. Usually, do some really fun, interesting ones. So hopefully, I'm a staple here. But going back to GE Ventures, I run a group called New Business Creation. We start companies. We start them across all the different businesses that G's in. I focus on healthcare while running the team. We get our ideas from GE customers and G's in terms of their needs, and so we see them and we start build them all the way up. And we usually do the whole Series A in that particular case. We do on the venture side. I have other colleagues who just do traditional corporate venture investing, and that we do later stages investing like Series A and Series B investments as well. We'll put about 10 to 15 million in the life of the company. I think from a career standpoint, I did a lot in what we call personalized medicine or molecular diagnostics when I was at Kleiner Perkins, which is where I was prior to GE. I think personalized medicine is evolved into precision medicine, with a much bigger definition that includes really data-based. I think at GE we like tech-enabled, what we call tech-enabled services. So I'm glad Amy brought it up. We are in genome medical as well. We think there's a lot. One of the biggest challenges with precision health or precision medicine is getting, you can get all this data, but how do you actually action it on a patient? And what we really liked about genome medical was that it was a service to try and actually make the new data actionable, and we think that's a really big barrier for precision health.
Ursheet.
So good evening, everyone. I'm Ursheet Parikh with Mayfield. Mayfield's one of the founding firms of venture capital. We just started our 50th year celebrations.
Congratulations.
And over that, have had been able to back over 500 great companies. Over 115 went public, over 200 sort of got acquired. I focus or lead our sort of healthcare and genomics investing. We are mainly a Series A investor where we will do occasionally some seed and some Series Bs. We are investing out of a little over 500 million as our Mayfield 15 and select funds. And in terms of where I'm investing and what precision health means, or actually before how we got here. So I think my partner Tim introduced me to Bambi, and she had me here I think 6 months ago. I think we were talking about precision, clinics, the future of clinics.
Yeah, future of clinics.
Yeah. And so glad to be back here. And this one's clearly right in the core, because when I think of precision health, it really is from a thesis on precision solutions at every point in the healthcare and wellness ecosystem. And so we see 5 big opportunities around this, and this is where we've invested. And so that will kind of give you a sense on the kind of stuff we look at. But for us, precision health starts with precision wellness. So that would be, just as Daniel explained how you need medication to be precisely tuned to you. I think how you stay in good health is very much like that, and that's kind of a chronic condition management and prevention. So we have a company called Zipongo over there. Then there's precision care, which is how is care delivered to you. And so we have a company which has now become one of the leading companies for AI and healthcare operations. It's a company called Cuventus. Then we look at sort of precision tools and platforms that are everywhere in the ecosystem. So you look at sequencing, that's giving you bulk sequencing data. If you want precision sequencing, because you want to find what are all the mutations that are simultaneously occurring in a cell. And so based on this company's product, a peer-reviewed paper was published by MD Anderson showing how you can now predict which mutations are going to cause the relapse and actually prevent that by prescribing the relapse prevention stuff up front. And so that's precision tools or precision sequencing, where we have a company called Mission Bio. Then there's precision diagnostics. In terms of 1 out of 3 deaths in hospitals today are happening with sepsis. And so you don't just need to know you have sepsis. It's like saying you have sepsis means you have cancer, right? Which cancer? So there you start having to think through exactly which virus or which bacteria, get very precise sort of understanding of a disease. And so there we funded, founded by Jennifer Doudna and 2 Stanford, 2 Berkeley students, a company called Mammoth Bio, which is applying CRISPR into diagnostics. And then there's, of course, precision medicine, where you can definitely have $500,000 and $1 million therapies that are going to precisely cure diseases. And there, our approach is, instead of doing individual medicine companies like what a biotech investor would do, we would rather focus on sort of platforms that can actually scalably deliver many, many more therapies and solutions. And that is also where we have to figure out what that new age of clinical trials, that kind of things works like. Because, and we think this whole opportunity in precision exists because, in the guise of data and evidence-based things, the whole healthcare and ecosystem has focused on sort of this population health averages thing. And I think they're not going to go and sort of change overnight on it, but I think entrepreneurs get to go and solve pieces of the problems and build some really big companies.
Great, I got one. My name is James. I'm a partner with Data Collective. We're a seed and Series A focused venture fund. We do mostly applied AI and deep tech investing. So what that means, I guess, in healthcare is really anything from the discovery all the way to kind of things that touch the patient, the payer, or the provider. We're interested in the application of intelligence to problems that each of those people along that value chain face. And we've made investments across that entire spectrum. Our most recent fund is just over $200 million, and probably about a third of that we've deployed in either the life sciences or healthcare. I'm sure I'll have a chance to talk about some of the portfolio companies later. My background is in physics and data analytics for biotech and pharma companies. So amongst the partnership, I focus a lot on kind of the life sciences piece, things that are focused on discovery, and then actually the clinical development of those compounds.
Thank you. I want to touch on what all of you said, but Ursheet and both James, you talked about sort of investing across every point of care. So that's from sort of screening all the way to treatment, and then Risa and Amy, you talked about new data and making it actionable. So I'll pose this question to Garrett, and then we can go down the line, and because I don't think you really took a deep dive into terms of precision health. But if you think about where you find this new data being actionable, whether it's in the screening, whether it's in the diagnostics, whether it's in the treatments, where do you see it most effective, and also what area are you excited about?
I'll give 3 examples of companies that are using machine learning to essentially drive their algorithms and help provide better care. One of them is called InsightRx. This is a company that Dr. Kraft just touched on, precision dosing. This is a company that doesn't look at the generic drugs, which are also hard to dose, but the specialty products, and starting with the pediatric side, helping the pharmacist tailor the dosing on these complex pharmaceuticals to drive towards a specific outcome based on that patient's information. So that is done oftentimes in the head of pharmacists, and this time it's used published pharmacological models and incorporated in a software package. So in essence, making it easier for many different pharmacists to become that one brilliant pharmacist that everyone tries to curbside to get the right dosage information. So that's called InsightRx. Another company is called Gauss Surgical. Gauss Surgical is augmenting the physicians and clinical staff's understanding of estimated blood loss in the operating room. So in real time, this company is taking computer images of bloodied sponges, blood in the canister, and giving a real-time estimate to everyone in the operating room on how much blood this patient has lost. So where that becomes really important is in obstetrics cases. That's the beachhead technology that this young team out of Stanford and UCSF has really gotten some good market adoption. Over 500 milliliters of blood lost, you have really big swings in terms of clinicians being able to accurately estimate how much blood is lost. Up until 500, it's okay, but after 500, you get the big variety in what clinicians think is on the chucks in the canisters. That's really important because it's around that level where you have to decide when you want to transfuse. So this company is really helping become more precise in understanding that specific part. That's the first use case where they got FDA approval. They're partnering with Apple and a number of other companies to really build out the platform. But that's an example of where it's very precise and it's a very specific use case, but the company's obviously looking to build a platform around that computer vision in the operating room thesis there. And the third one is Pieces Technologies. Pieces Technologies is a spin out of Parkland Hospital. Parkland Hospital is a safety net hospital in Dallas, Texas. Safety net hospitals are often required to be at risk and monitor and take care of patients out after they leave the walls of the hospital. So Pieces has developed a product that's called Iris. It is connected to the community-based organizations around a hospital addressing the social determinants of health. Did the patient show up for their homeless shelter or whatever appointment they have after they have been discharged from the hospital? This is a way to collect that data and at the very most basic level, keep track of whether or not these folks are complying to their care paths outside of the hospital, really making an impact in the 20 plus hospitals that it's been deployed in. So that's an example of the places we invest.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question on that. These are three very unique use cases and so important for the outcome for the patient. How do you see adoption? Because, the workflows are all built out and then you create these unique solutions. Are you seeing traction and adoption from the time of discovery to FDA approval to them hitting the patient one?
Yeah, and there's multiple, and I think Amy can attest to this, there are multiple stakeholders that need to be convinced when you're making a hospital point of solution sale or an enterprise-wide sale. It is a painful process, and one that now that I'm on the inside of a hospital system, I'm intimately becoming familiar with that. We only invest in companies that have an impact on our system, so we've already done the work like Amy. We know that it will solve a need at our hospital system, and so the thesis there is we talk about the companies after we invest in them to get as much attention to those companies as possible, but there's no way to circumvent the long sales cycle and implementation cycle that is healthcare sales, hospital sales. One thing I will say is there seems to be more acceptance toward cloud-based solutions, which is still early days, but we're seeing more and more that major obstacle being overcome, which will definitely help this entire topic that we're discussing here, because to free up the data means to better analyze it and to provide better care. Amy, I know you're eager to answer this one.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of things that you touched on that resonated, and I think the how specific the use case is a key one. How thoughtful it is that I take this information and I do that with it is such a critical component, and that's one of the things that we look for, because that's our screen. It's because I think precision medicine is actually hitting up against the other trend that's huge is clinician burnout, where more data does not make better medicine. We've sort of exploded the amount of data, and we actually have to bring it back in smart and intelligent ways that are actionable. And so that's really our screen for that, is how is someone going to use that information to change their therapeutic decision on that patient? And then how is that going to translate? Are they going to trust that translation? Is it something that they can trust? Is it a black box? Like, that is one thing we've sort of thrown at anything that's a black box. Because clinicians, they're charged with the health of their patient, and if they can't just spit out an answer and trust it, they actually have to be able to understand why that answer is. And so it's almost like taking it from the explosion of information, of simplifying it back down in very smart and thoughtful ways that then can be trusted and acted upon. And sometimes it's taking the clinician completely out of that dialogue, but in a way that can be trusted. So I think those are areas that we're looking at. That's really the screen that we look at anytime we look at something that's precision health.
So those are the success factors that you look in any company, that how easy it is for a provider adoption.
Or provider, or if there is an opportunity to minimize the amount of time the provider has to interact, or minimize to just specific cases as opposed to all the cases, but in a way that a clinician can trust. And sometimes that's evidence, and sometimes that's just the way the analytics have been built. But we've seen a lot of things that are sort of a little bit too black box, and that's just, you can't just say, oh, trust me, I've done the work. So I think that's absolutely a screen we use.
Excellent.
Yeah, so I'm going to go a little bit in a different direction because I don't work for a hospital system. I do work for a big company, but one of the things that we found at GE is that we sell things to pharma companies. And one of the points of translation is in clinical trials or dealing with cell and gene therapy. And I'll take cell and gene therapy first, because we have a whole business that sells equipment and reagents into that, and our customers are companies like Celgene and Editas and companies like that. And one of the really interesting things about cell and gene therapy, particularly cell therapy, is it's so incredibly personalized. It's batch by batch. And one of the things that we found is, and we developed a software company to address this called Venetti, is that the process of just getting the patient's cells, treating them and getting back them is logarithmically more complicated than any drug we have. We have to know exactly what happened to the patient's cells at every step of the way. But the other really interesting thing that we're finding is that they want to know, like one patient, you might get really great expansion of their T cells and have a great number to put back in the patient to fight cancer. Another patient, you might not get very good expansion at all. Maybe you can't even treat the patient. And this is actually becoming a problem with Novartis' drug Chimera. Sometimes they can't get the cells to expand enough to actually have a therapy for the patient. And so one of the things that the companies in the space want to know is just like batch by batch data. Like why is, really understand, because each different patient cells are a different drug. And so they need to understand in a very unique way about what is happening to those individual cells. So I think that's kind of the ultimate precision medicine, is we're taking someone's cells and treating them. So that's one thing that we think is really interesting. And then another company that Amy was involved that we started called Evidation Health, which is really looking at behavioral health and what can you do to identify early symptoms of Alzheimer's and other aspects. So I think there's a whole pharma component here that's really wrapped into this definition as well. So I think, as was said earlier by one of the past, it really expands across, and you can play in different places. Like we played in Genome Medical with Amy, but we also play with the pharma companies because we have a lot of different clients. We have hospital clients, we have pharma company clients. So.
I guess so you play across the spectrum as well. Where do you see us making real inroads with precision health?
Yeah, I think going directly to the patient is doing things like at the hospital with the patients is really great. But I like going upstream with the pharma companies because that's actually hopefully helping drug development so that ultimately we don't have the drug work on 1 out of 24 individuals, and if we can really more understand a lot of the components of that, I think that's important.
You want to go first? Sure. I guess I'd love to understand the audience. This is going to a little bit more. Like, how many entrepreneurs do we have? Oh, wow, most people. Okay. And how many clinicians? Okay. And then do we have any, like, big company people? Okay, cool. You're cool, too. I mean, I almost forgot the question, to be honest. I mean, it's so vast, I think, that I'm just going to talk about one company in my portfolio that I think really emphasizes maybe precision medicine or precision treatment of a particular patient. So we invested in a company called Carius. And what it does is it's a hypothesis-free blood test. So if you have a patient and they're in the ICU and they're collapsing, you don't know what's going on, you don't necessarily have to have a hypothesis about what that patient might be afflicted with and then test against that specific hypothesis. You just take a blood draw, you send it to Carius. They sequence the entire sample and they compare that to their database, and then they can tell you what that patient has. And so I think this, it's a nice example of where I think medicine might be going. For a long time, it was hypothesis-driven. Where you need to have a particular hypothesis about a patient and then test that hypothesis. As we get more data, I think you can start to relax what those hypotheses look like. And you might be able to try and treat a patient without actually knowing or having a strong prior about what that patient might have. I know there's a lot of problems with that, but I think Carius is a great example of an actual implementation of it. And I think at this point they saved over 1,000 lives at this point for this particular use case. And if you go to their website, there's a bunch of case studies. There was one where, and I think, Ursheet, you were talking about sepsis. So yeah, sepsis, you don't actually know what the bacteria is. There's a patient who was in the ICU for 8 days, different cocktails of antibiotics. They sent a test out to Carius. They got the results back in 24 hours. I think it was like Fusobacterium or something like that. And then the physicians were able to construct a cocktail of therapeutics that would target that, and the patient was out within a week. And I think that's a great example of a lot of the things that we've been talking about I won't go on. I'll hand it over to you, Ursheet.
So it's interesting what you're saying, which is the version maybe 3.0 of medicine. The version 1.0 was book-based, so whatever is written in the book is what you do. And then it became evidence-based, in which you had randomized control trials and observation of patients. There was an average patient, so we did kind of come up with a term of population health, in which, 80-20 rule. And then now we're getting into more precision, in which we, thanks to Obamacare, other initiatives that enabled us to go into digital health. So all of the data of patients is historical data is starting to sit on in a discrete platform, in which you can actually query it in a lot more intelligent way. And I like, how Curious is a canvas. This is, you don't go with an evidence bias. You're actually going with a curiosity of what is going on with the patient, so that you're coming out with a lot more precise diagnostic. So that's kind of an interesting version 3.0 of medicine that we are kind of starting in an infancy stage.
There is risk to 3.0 in the sense, both you and I, having gone through medical training, you still need to be able to perform without the technology. You have to be able to do a good history and physical exam. I think if you lose the ability to do that, I brought my car in recently, something was wrong with it, and first thing they did was, put it into the computer. And the guy goes, nothing's wrong with it. And I'm like, it stopped driving on the way home. Like, come again? Like, put a stethoscope up to it. It's those types of basic skills that I worry that the medical profession doesn't lose when it becomes so easy. Order Curious.
Well, Curious is
totally
the other
different
diagnostic
case.
aspect,
Sure.
But having said that, when we don't have a bias before even examining the patient or asking questions, the data that is historical for that patient can give us a lot of cues that can start driving a decision-making in a lot more precise way for that patient, and not considering that patient as an average patient, so to say. So
Hopefully fewer errors.
I just have,
yes.
I've personal experience and stories that started my journey in healthcare because of being called an average patient, having a set of prescriptions, having a set of side effects, and then essentially going cold turkey on the healthcare ecosystem to body hack myself to good health. But I think there's a question over there.
Yeah.
I just had a question. Even in unsupervised analyses, don't you think that the way that you analyze data sometimes takes on the soul of the person that's analyzing it almost? So if you basically go into a data set, and if you're an engineer or something, you kind of think of data in a different way than me as a clinician, because I do both. And I think one thing that's difficult when I think of predictive medicine is that if I'm a clinician, I go in and I make a judgment based on things that I don't even understand that I'm making a judgment about, like how somebody smells, how they're walking, all of these things that aren't always in our traditional data sets. And, the process of how these things are collected also matters. So, a blood test is collected when somebody comes in the door versus, 4 days later after a clinician has been treating them. So that's why their creatinine or, a value is lower. It just seems difficult to, say that data will solve everything without also being cognizant of the process and the way that it's being analyzed almost. So, I don't know.
Oh, yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think there's tons of information about a patient that isn't effectively captured in the systems. That a clinician or someone who's sitting with that patient is able to kind of internalize, and they also have models for interpreting that data, right? Just because they're a person, they have experiences and they know how to think about it. And yeah, I think it's really difficult to try and codify that and put it into a database that you can analyze. So yeah, I definitely think that there's limitations to that kind of, some people talk about how we're not going to have physicians in 20 years. I don't think that's true. But I do think that there is an ability to kind of augment that decision making, especially when the decisions or the things that you're trying to diagnose would benefit from taking a lot of little factors that contribute to that, as opposed to like one or two big factors, and that there's many limitations that people have in terms of actually being able to diagnose these complex things when lots of little pieces contribute to it.
So, given James did the polling and showed that we had a lot of entrepreneurs in here, if I may, what I'd rather take Bambi's question on is that I think each of us is probably, I've seen probably 500 companies doing data analytics in some level of traction in some part of this broad ecosystem. So what I could kind of share with you is the framework that we think companies that can start out with that and get their first 1 or 2 customers to actually what will become standalone companies that are able to realize their mission around this ecosystem of how you sort of leverage data. So first, I think it's recognizing the trend that the cost to digitize biology is going down exponentially. And so you can look at not only sequencing, but wearables. You know, CRISPR can actually do nucleic acid detection without any devices, right? Precision sequencing, graphene-based like biosensors, which are actually doing sort of actual monitoring of blood glucose non-invasively and things like that. So we're going to keep on getting more and more of this data. This is going to get enhanced with all kinds of tools that we have with gene editing and gene synthesis and all the GWAS, bioinformatics and all of that stuff like that. And so this is going to give us a much easier way to kind of go build a whole new class of applications. And these applications could be diagnostics, could be therapeutics, could be just behavioral modulation stuff that you kind of do on mobile phones and things like that. In all of this, we then end up having to meet with the reality of a healthcare ecosystem that is working in a certain way. Mm-hmm. And so the top leading indicator that I think shows whether a company is going to be able to build a big standalone business and afford its own route to market to then be an independent company to realize its mission is whether it can figure out its business model and show the viability of its business model right with the seed money. So the top mistake, the absolute number one mistake that I see companies making in this space is that they take all the initial financing and just focus on product or technology and not proving out sort of the viability of the business model. Now, if you can, right, then it sort of fundamentally allows you, because here's the problem. If you as a company in this ecosystem get acquired into one of the other companies in the ecosystem, nobody in the existing ecosystem is waking up thinking, how are they going to reinvent the whole thing? How are they going to give you 10x sort of the wellness for the same price? The existing ecosystem just won't do that. And so if you get acquired into one of the companies in the existing ecosystem, your mission's lost and you become a cog in the wheel. And this becomes the leading indicator. So we spoke about hospitals. We invested in a company that sells to hospitals, and absolutely the number one leading indicator was that they were able to connect cold with people in ICUs or ORs off LinkedIn and actually close 100K or 200K ARR deals within 90 days. And that was Vygantas. And all the people we brought who are experts in selling to hospitals says it's impossible, this cannot be done. They meet the company and they're like, can we be advisors here? Can we engage here? And so there was a certain part and a process that, it took the founders 2 years to kind of iterate and figure out what that ideal business model was going to be. And they had raised $2 million in seed. They had spent only 500K of that, or maybe 600K. And they were already with 10 hospitals as customers, right? Had $1 million plus in ARR by the time our Series A closed. And they've been just incredibly efficient because they've been able to figure that part of it out as they have scaled the business up. So I think that to me is and then if you figure the business model out, the other thing that's pretty consistent and clear is that you cannot really have a real business model. In other words, know who's going to pay and how much and show that you can get paid fast enough without actually having a certain sense of user delight, right? So whether your user is a doctor, a nurse, a consumer, a clinician, a researcher, whoever, you have to be able to find a way where whatever you've delivered has fundamentally sort of made them better. And this is where we are big believers in using data for intelligent augmentation rather than artificial intelligence. So for example, if I'm trying to replace a doctor with a software product, this is a really bad business because now my software product has to be better than the doctor all the time. And it has to go into an existing healthcare ecosystem, but now I have to deal with the politics of selling, and replacing someone. Versus if I do intelligent augmentation, I just have to make a user into a superhero. And when they can use the product and do their jobs that much better, they become the evangelists. They are the ones who create the pull. And they actually become a big factor that drives sort of the discovery of the business model. So those would be the two things that I'd love to highlight around that.
Yeah, that's great. I think you segued into actually thinking about your customers and who are the deep-pocketed customers. How do you, I think, Risa, you talked a lot about pharma. From what I hear, pharma works pretty fast. They're pretty deep-pocketed. Maybe those are who you target. Maybe the self-insured employers, they're also extremely innovative. Yeah. So any lessons here for the entrepreneurs where one of your companies in precision medicine actually went down the wrong path and had the wrong business model, had the wrong target end
Well,
customer?
I'd just like to say that I think the target customer is super important in terms of validating the business model. Like pharma has money. Hospitals are slower to buy. Self-insured employers, though, everyone thinks they're great, but I work for one of the largest self-insured employers, and I spent a lot of time trying to get them to adopt technology. And there are some very progressive ones in Silicon Valley. There are some that are less progressive, and so that's not actually. I think it's tough for the self-insured employers, but so I think there are a lot of companies that have gone down the wrong route a little bit. I think the biggest thing is listen to your customer. I have one company that's in this space, and it's really interesting. An asset they built for themselves internally is turning out to be really interesting, and the clients are asking, like, can we buy that? Like, can we buy into your database? Because we actually don't know how to store our data. The pharma companies are asking this, like, oh, that's really interesting. Maybe we can sell that. So I think another thing is, to your point, be flexible, right? Maybe you're trying to sell the customer something and they actually want to buy something else. So really listen to that. But I think the pharma companies are a good place to start. I think hospitals are harder, self-insured employers are harder. I think that's one of the really interesting things about precision health is like who your customer is, because a lot of the customers who actually need this, I think, are often slower adopters in the technology. So.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons when we either do diligence on an individual company or we proactively reach out to our leadership, we are looking for that strong signal that I need to solve this problem and I can't just rearrange the resources I have myself. And I think that is the distinction we look for because we're slower. And so if it's a nice to have or it's, it's valuable, but there's only so many things you could do. And providers are, providing healthcare. And so that is, innovation is not the first thing on their mind. It is, they've got a patient coming in the door. They've got to do the right thing. And they've got, lots of employees and keeping the lights on in a critical moment of their patients' lives. And so if you are disrupting that with something new, disruption is good in Silicon Valley. Disruption in the care delivery is not something that's good. And so you need to really think, those people need to solve this problem in order to tolerate the disruption, tolerate the opportunity cost of not focusing on their patients. So we look for that every day. So I think, to the point was made, that's exactly what we look for when we're doing diligence. So if you've got that with somebody, then you've got your first foothold. And that may be a wedge into many other things, but you've got to have that one. Because it's good or it's valuable broadly. It isn't enough to get some of the big enterprises to move.
For me, the trifecta that really gets me excited is everyone talks about reducing cost and improving quality, but if there's an angle where you can increase revenues to the system, that is the trifecta there. Hard to find in software companies. You can actually do a better job uncovering that in med tech, having some sort of reimbursement pathway as a device or a diagnostic oftentimes. So I always try to find those, but they're hard to come by.
So I think the question really was, when have companies, so two things. First, I kind of agree, but I somewhat disagree. I think each type of sort of entity in the healthcare ecosystem, there is a big opportunity to actually build pretty large companies. And typically, I think the way it ends up becoming is you're augmenting a certain entity and taking on some other entity. So you're kind of creating some sort of an ecosystem dynamic. And this is where I think exceptional entrepreneurs are sort of going and figuring this thing out early, because in many ways your go-to market has to sort of become a function of the product. And it's this iterative loop that then sort of determines, what is the set of features and offering that you prioritize. And the customer is usually right, but not always right. And one of the biggest benefits that emerging companies have is you get to choose your customers. And so once they've paid you, you can't afford to have a bad reference. And so you really want to be careful, when you take money from customers, do you really want to be in that business, and is that what you want to commit yourself to for the next X many years of your life? So in terms of mistakes, I think the top mistake that I've seen companies that have gone through this initial hurdle and have gone and fumbled has actually been in sales to self-insured employers. So self-insured employers are among the biggest driving forces of innovation in all of the healthcare ecosystem. They are paying for about 40% of the total cost of healthcare. The government is another 40%, right? Between
I was about to bring up that point.
Correct. And so, but here's what has happened for them, right? You have sort of the head of benefits, who's typically the big decision maker. This person never gets applauded or acknowledged for doing stuff right. But if my favorite provider is not in the system, then there's all kinds of breakbacks that show up. And so the result is you end up having this ever-increasing premium loop, and it ends up far exceeding inflation. And there's a whole different conversation on why sort of the healthcare premiums keep on going up. But then effectively in the total healthcare spend, there's only I'm making up a number, but it's close to that range, that 98% is going to go in the healthcare premiums, and then 2% is going to go in, quotes, this benefits or this innovation bucket. It's really this 2% that is being used to dress up the pig, which is the regular health plan. And so the tendency to dress up the pig is what's new and cool this year. So there's a flavor of the year dynamic that happens where when you are selling to self-insured employers, if you're new and cool, you will find customers and adoption out in year one. But then for the benefits manager, you have such a long laundry list of stuff. A lot of it is not getting used, it's not getting adopted because the benefits team don't have the staff to actually drive up the adoption. And so you end up then having to kind of go the next year and you have to cull it, and then you're not finding the adoption. And so that can end up being a bad signal. And it's even worse if you end up selling to this customer, because this customer doesn't have the bandwidth to buy 30 products and integrate them. So then they want you to say, oh, come use Provence or Jeff or Welltalk or any of those. And a lot of those companies are very challenged, right? Provence filed for bankruptcy, and so the whole benefits channel has been quite challenged. So I think that a place where a lot of false signal has come and has impacted a lot of companies, I think that's one category.
Well, I think the self-insured employers have definitely, because it hits the bottom line, they have revolutionized the whole value-based care movement in a way. And that has led to solutions that are in-hospital system solutions that are driving the value-based care, and some standalone like Zipango and likes, or Livongos and Glucose that are standalone systems or solutions that self-insured employers are buying. And yes, it is a cost, but they're starting to see that the only way for us to, and you mentioned the lipstick on the pig, but the only way for us to bend the curve, cost curve, is by actually having to invest in that 2%, increase that 2% spend so that the 98% starts to shrink down. So it's very interesting that we see pharma being an opportunity or health systems being an opportunity, but at the end of the day, it has to be delightful not just for the patient and the provider, but also the payer. And those are the solutions that hopefully would be the future solutions.
Correct. And so the companies that have done well in that have been able to show that while they got the entry from the benefits provider to the users, they use that as effectively a license to really engage those users. And the ones that continue to get the impact do so when they actually have sustained user engagement. And that user engagement cannot be compared to other healthcare products. It needs to be compared to stuff like Snapchat and Twitter and Instagram. Mm-hmm. And that's the benchmark. And you're now finally beginning to see a set of companies that are beginning to show that level of user engagement.
Well, I think an interesting aspect, because I worked very closely with the head of benefits for GE, and would bring them things, and they really, the bottom line is it goes to the bottom line. That's what was the most thing, is anything that had to do with networks or getting the patients more efficient care, that was really interesting. But all the wellness stuff, they're like, it wasn't worth, because rolling it out to 300,000 people is really challenging. And then GE has so many different populations, because we have a lot of people overseas, we have people in the U.S. and people in California, but then we have people in Tennessee, et cetera. So just a wide variety of people. One of the things that was really interesting, though, and was in terms of trying to get creative. A lot of companies have vision plans, and I don't know, GE has one. If you live in California, it's not great to benefit, but they got really creative. They were talking to Warby Parker and trying to figure out, wow, this is a cool company. This is a company that a lot of people, younger people, buy their glasses from. Wow, we see that a lot of people don't want to use the vision benefit, but hey, if we did something with Warby Parker. So I think in that way it was really interesting, because they were toying with, do we keep the vision benefit, do we not? And they found a way that would actually be something that was more efficient and easier for the employees to use, And they were even toying with the idea of, hey, is there a way we can do eye exams at the work site? So I think the interesting thing is there's a certain level of technology that if you can make it really easy, because that Warby Parker existed, we didn't have to create it, is there just a way that we could partner with them? So I think for some of them, co-opting kind of some of the newer companies in terms of that are already delivering benefit in a novel way was way easier than kind of creating something.
Yeah, and you mentioned that wellness was a nice and fuzzy thing. It used to be before, but it's becoming more quantified, and it's becoming actually much more measurable through data. So we're starting to see cafeteria solutions, and Pongo is one of them, but there are many that are starting to make data more actionable for the end user. And as a self-insured employer, we need to have a full 360-degree solution in which lifestyle, a healthy lifestyle, needs to be precise again. So it's precision medicine. As you see, that we launched with Future of Clinics early this year, the first session that we did. You're seeing the clinics starting to focus on self-insured employers. You're seeing One Medical kind of growing, premise health, growing to scale that's beyond, and Apple is throwing their hat in the bucket. So there is a lot of changes that are starting to happen focused on self-insured employers. Other solutions that are doing narrow networks are also very much precision medicine, because they understand the data that's now coming from claims. And they're looking at where is this end user consuming health, and then becoming much more precise in providing a high worth network.
And I would, just pull that thread a little further. When you think about the health plans, because the fragmentation of the self-insured employers is challenging. If you roll it up to the health plans, some of the things we're talking about are sort of whiz-bang futuristic, but there's some really basic fragmentation within the care continuum of a patient that, if solved with data and understanding that flow and making that flow more efficient, more appropriate, it's it doesn't feel like precision medicine as it's talked about, but because it's so basic, but it is based on our delivery system, there's a natural fragmentation that solving can have a huge ROI. So there may be some things that are on the periphery of solving problems and are, don't have the same ROI. If you can dig deep into, the meat of the delivery of healthcare and the dollars that are there, that's really meaningful. So I think, we can get too far afield of some of the basic blocking and tackling that data and analytics can really help. But we have to be thoughtful about it and jump into the meat of where the health spend is, because I think that's where you get the traction sooner in the big enterprise.
Yeah.
We have 5 minutes, so if anybody wants to have a question, I think you should really take the time to ask the question. Archana talked about quantified self, so I wanted to just know, with the experts here of precision health, how many have a wearable? 2 of them. I'm getting one. I'm finally getting one for Christmas, but.
I feel quantifying yourself has to be personalized too, because there is a subset of my patient population that don't want to even see the numbers of steps, and they're extremely active, and they are extremely healthy. And then there is a group that are obsessed with number of steps that they've taken, and then there's a group that you can give them how many Fitbits you want, they won't move. So you can actually stratify the population, and we have to personalize that solution to that end user.
Well, I think that people wear wearables for different reasons. I think that's to your point. I mean, I wear my Apple Watch because I do different forms of exercise, and I've figured out which exercise burns the most calories, gets my heart rate up. If I'm going to work out for 45 minutes, I'm going to max it out. And so that's what I learned about using my wearable.
But that's the new information, that's the new data.
Yeah.
That's pooled into all of this, new data. If you think about, and maybe this is too simplistic, if you think about all the new data, whether it's social determinants, whether it's from your wearables, is there anything that pops up that you would say that's actually, that data is incredibly useful, has been useful today?
I hope that just a company down the road here, Grail, they're working on diagnosing cancer, earliest forms of cancer through a blood test. I hope that turns out to be actionable and high impact. It certainly seems like it should be.
Question related to that. So, in terms of data, and you mentioned Grail, I'm interested to know from the panel, what are your thoughts on direct-to-consumer lab testing, similar to Grail, but essentially health test in a box, right? And what do you see, how do you see that shaping precision medicine and the industry in general when it comes to lab testing?
Truly doing justice to that question would take a long time. But I'll give you what is my sort of favorite example. We invested in a company recently, which is basically cleared the first FDA-approved clinical grade over-the-counter test. The way that test works is for a set of conditions, you'd get this test, you take a picture, and because it's clinical grade, a telemed consult on messaging can happen off it, and a pill comes to you. And it could go to your pharmacy, or you could get the prescription sent to you directly. The irony is that it's $25 for this whole experience. But if you just looked at your copays for like you call your doctor, you say you have a problem, they prescribe a test, you go get the test done, then the result comes, then you go see the doctor again to get your prescription, and then you collect the prescription. You live in pain for 5 days, or 3 days, or 2 days, or whatever, and you still pay more versus something like that. So I think that kind of stuff will end up being very actionable and will end up being good business models. I think the other stuff that is going to be good business models is what I would say is the entertainment bucket, right? So 23andMe, Ancestry. They've found a way to engage users in those conversations and then over time make it more meaningful and actionable. You can take your 23andMe data, go to your primary care physician, and they're able to run an analysis to show exactly what Daniel was talking about, how your drug interactions work and things like that. And in those category of companies, you really have to know your business model well, right? Cost to acquire customers, revenue, things like that. So I think, and the other thing is that's generally increasing the overall population awareness around genomic health, genomic data, things like that. So those I think are sort of the highlights. But if you see, there's lots of companies that have gone public and then have struggled because when you are trying to do a prenatal test or something like that, you have to really think through the economics of does the cost to acquire the customer for a direct pay, pay for the cost, really is covered well in the gross margin and repeat use and things like that. And so, when we funded Mammoth, one of the things we liked about it was that they had picked one of those direct-to-consumer repeat use tests on the STD side where you could get results within minutes versus having to wait 24 or 48 hours when you mail the kit out.
And I would just to add to that, those are opportunities that even the traditional players could be interested in if they make sense. So there are partner opportunities, because I think it's one of the issues we've pushed a lot into telemedicine, because we're not beholden to some of the reimbursement issues around that. And so we've pushed a lot into it. It's still challenging to figure out exactly what those workflows are, but one of the challenges in that is that even if you do the virtual visit, you still have to go somewhere for lab or pharmacy. And so solving that last piece so that you can fully move as much care out of brick and mortar is a benefit to everyone. I think there's a big recognition that the productivity hit of taking a day off work so you can go into this, and then that just isn't possible. None of us want to do it, and we're not even constrained by transportation or not being able to take time off work, et cetera. So I think there are real opportunities, but I do agree that really think through, because the high level model in and of itself could be a trap. And so really think through exactly how you partner with that.
Yeah, so I ran innovation for Medco before it was acquired by Express Scripts. And in 2011, we bought a company called DNA Direct, which was at the bleeding edge of precision medicine. And so the idea was that you would do your genomic testing, identify your metabolic rate in order to do precision pharmacology. And the problem was that number one, the provider needs to know about the test, and they need to know that test A is better than test B, and what are the outcomes, and then who pays. So how do you integrate that technology into the payer's scheme? And so ultimately it just went away. So perhaps in the 7 years since, it's evolved. but it seems like there's still a lot of barriers and obstruction to trying to integrate all of that.
Absolutely, right. I don't think, I think if this company was here today, it would probably have the same fate. And what would have to change is, in the end, people build companies. And so the founders would have to go and figure out for their offering what is going to be that full user engagement business model, movement, resource mapping to kind of build a viable company. And so one of the challenges that investors often, and a lot of the people around this domain, what brings us all together is a very strong sense of mission. And you know, this is needed, this will be solved, we can do a few calls, things like that. But the general thing on that is, you need the people to kind of go and figure these things out very early in the life cycle of the company.
And you know, that space is changing. People are learning from early attempts. So Color Genomics is one of the companies that is direct to self-insured employers that offers the full journey from like genetic testing for specific conditions, and then thereafter genetic counseling.
Right.
So it is a full package, so to say, for the patient or end user that they do provide. I think it's time. We've had quite a bit of discussion around challenges and successes, and we truly enjoyed our discussion. Thank you so much for joining the panel. A round of applause. Yeah.